I mean, conventionally, we're taught that, if your blood hormone levels look okay, then your thyroid's okay. That's what we're taught. And so unless you've had extra training, or maybe you even find a doctor that's got a thyroid condition themselves, that's probably also a good start, then they then realise how integrative that approach has got to be.
Welcome to Let's Talk Thyroid, where we explore different aspects of living a healthy thyroid lifestyle, positively and practically, to help you thrive and not just survive. Join me, Annabelle Bateman, your host, and let's talk thyroid. Removing typically inflammatory foods can make a massive difference for our thyroid health, but it can also seem completely overwhelming and almost impossible. I mean, how do we do without gluten, grains, dairy, sugar, legumes? Oh my gosh. Well, I have taken the overwhelm out of it and packaged together all the steps to show you exactly how, and I guide you through it in a 30-day wellness challenge. So if you want some help to overhaul your diet and see just how good you could feel, check out my 30-day wellness challenge link in the show notes. It's my privilege to introduce you today to Dr Elen ApThomas. Ellen has been my personal thyroid health doctor for over 15 years and has been instrumental in helping me manage my thyroid health holistically. Dr Elen ApThomas is an integrative holistic doctor trained in both conventional and integrative medicine. She holds bachelor's in medicine and surgery from Adelaide, a diploma in obstetrics and gynecology, and is a member of the Australian College of Nutritional and Environmental Medicine. She's been practicing for over 26 years and is the founding doctor of a large multidisciplinary medical practice, the Medical Sanctuary in Benoa on the Gold Coast, Australia, with medical doctors, naturopaths, osteopaths, acupuncture, colonic hydrotherapist and massage therapy. She's a wife and mother to 3 girls aged 10, 12 and 15, and her philosophy of medicine is to heal the body through addressing the true cause of disease. Join me now as I chat with Dr Elen ApThomas about thyroid health. Hello, Ellen, and welcome to the Let's Talk Thyroid podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me. That's lovely.
Look, it's my pleasure. I've been thinking a lot about this conversation because I think I worked out that you've been my doctor for about more than 14 years.
It's actually very scary.
Yeah,
yes.
It is.
Especially when you start talking about your 16-year-old son.
Yeah. So I know because I started seeing you when I was pregnant with Ben and he's 14. So
Yep.
Yeah. So I am incredibly grateful. And I thought as I think about this over the last week, I kept crying and I think I'm going to cry.
I'm very touched. It's beautiful.
But anyway, and I am wearing my T-shirt that says grateful. It's probably backwards.
So beautiful.
Because
that's perfect.
I am grateful that I have had you looking after me for such a long time. And
thank you.
I know so many people have difficulties finding a doctor that understands thyroid issues and that acknowledges that there are lots of things going on. And, I hear so many people having those problems. And so I am grateful that that hasn't been my experience, apart from my one time of cheating on you. When I was
It's healthy.
Well, good relationships. No, I'm not going to go down there.
No. I know what you mean. Yes.
So I did cheat on you once and it didn't work well for me, let's just say that. And so I'm back. I've been back for a while. I'm sure we might cover that when we get to the weight loss because, Duramine's was an interesting part of my life. Yeah.
Yes. Well, sometimes you just try things and you go, right, well, at least I can tick that box and I know that didn't work for me. So sometimes that's a good thing. Yeah.
So in the context of I am grateful that I have had you and I haven't had to do this horrible kind of shopping around trying to find a good doctor, I'm just wondering, can you tell me, what advice, from a doctor's point of view, what advice have you got for patients who do struggle to find a doctor that will listen to them, help them get diagnosed properly, treat them well?
Yes. I think that you've got to realise that when we're trained conventionally, we taught as though all organs are independent. We taught that the thyroid is independent to the liver, is independent to the brain, and it's a matter of finding a doctor that understands that all organs affect all other organs. And we're lucky in Australia. There's a college called ACNAM, the Australasian College of Nutritional and Environmental Medicine, and they train doctors that are conventionally trained into being more holistically minded. So, and there's a good website. It's acnem.org, and then you can just look up practitioners on that website, and it's broken down into states and suburbs. Now, every practitioner on there will have had different interests, but if you can find a practitioner on there that's specifically interested in thyroid, that would be ideal. But at least then they will be thinking outside the conventional box, where they realise how much the thyroid affects all other organs and all other organs affect the thyroid. And that's sort of a good start for any conversation with a practitioner.
Okay. Yeah, because I think when I was talking about these types of questions with my husband, he said, well, why don't you ask Ellen if there's like a test that you can put the doctor through?
Okay, it's pretty hardcore, but yeah.
I said, that's the engineer. And I'm like, I'm not quite sure about that. So isn't there a test that you can put them through to see how well they understand thyroid disease? But I'm not going to ask you to answer that question.
Well, no, look, it's only that, conventionally we're taught that, if your blood hormone levels look okay, then your thyroid's okay. That's what we're taught. And so unless you've had extra training, or maybe you even find a doctor that's got a thyroid condition themselves, that's probably also a good start, then they then realise how integrative that approach has got to be. So you could ask the doctor, do you realise that gut health affects thyroid health, and see what they say.
Yeah. And so if someone's having difficulty, say they've got a good relationship with their doctor and they're not necessarily wanting to find another doctor, but they're having difficulty getting the right test, can you just go over what are the right tests that people should be asking for?
Yeah. Look, I think what a lot of people don't realise is they can ask for tests and pay for them privately. I think the big issue with us as doctors is we've got to justify to Medicare every test that we do, that we bill the government for. So if you go and have a blood test done, and the government will pick up most of that bill, because a lot of blood tests are hundreds of dollars.
Yeah.
So as a conventional doctor, if you can see that the screening blood test, that thyroid stimulating hormone, that TSH test looks okay, yet the patient in front of you says, but I've got all these underactive thyroid symptoms, then you as a patient can say, look, I'm happy to pay, $80 or $100 and privately test my free T3 levels or my free T4 levels and my thyroid antibodies, or even my reverse T3 level. So then I think the doctor then doesn't feel threatened, because they don't have to justify to the government, what the cost is. Now, that doctor then has to know how to interpret those tests, of course. So if you've got a doctor who says, well, I'm not prepared to do that, then that's not the doctor I think that you want to have looking after you specifically for that thyroid condition. I'm not saying they're not a good doctor, but it just means they're not thinking outside that conventional sort of thought process.
Okay. So that doctor, though, could order those tests for you. You just have to pay for them privately as opposed to Medicare. You don't have to go elsewhere.
No. Okay. You just go to your normal lab where you'd have your normal other bloods done, and then the results will go back to that doctor, and then you can have another conversation about it.
Okay. Oh, well, that's good.
Because sometimes you find that the TSH, the screening test, is normal, but people have very high levels of thyroid antibodies. So that then says, right, well, there's an inflammatory thyroid condition going on here that logically has to be affecting your health.
Yeah, recently took a course through the Karatsian Institute. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Dartzis Karatsian, but it was all on Hashimoto's. He's done a lot of research into Hashimoto's, and he was saying that the research shows that it can take up to 7 years from having the autoimmunity switched on before you actually will have symptoms even.
Absolutely.
So he was an advocate for testing those thyroid antibody levels, even as the initial thing.
Yeah. Well, because see, the way I look at it is saying, well, look, the person who has thyroid antibodies, they've got a major inflammatory condition, and that will be affecting organs other than your thyroid as well. Mm. So we've got a lot of reserve, like the thyroid can cope to a point, but it's then if symptoms start occurring, so we've got to start looking at how does a patient feel as against sometimes what comes back on a blood test. And you've got to remember that blood tests just show us what's going on in the blood. They don't show us what's going on in the organ. So our tests are limited. You've got to look at the entire patient as well.
Are there other tests that we should be getting as well, like, vitamin or mineral deficiencies, or I don't know.
Vitamin D is crucial. Yep, vitamin D is a crucial test, and some doctors will put that test through Medicare and some won't. Our criteria is that unless you've got a clinical reason or the patient doesn't go outside very much, sometimes you've got to say, look, we've got to get the patient to pay for that test privately as well. The other one is your electrolytes and liver function. So if you find that their body's very acidic, if their bicarbonate levels are very low, then that means that there's a detoxifying problem, or the pancreas isn't functioning properly, or the digestion isn't functioning properly, and certainly gut health has a major effect on thyroid health. So there are other little red flags that you can pick up on.
So one of the other questions that I hear a lot is that your standard thyroid medication isn't always the best fit for everyone. So can you just run through what other options have we got other than Oroxen?
Sure.
What have we got?
Okay. So what you've got to remember is that, and I know a lot of your listeners already know this, that thyroxine is what we call a precursor hormone. So it itself doesn't do anything. You've actually got to be able to convert that thyroxine, which is T4, into T3. And that's the hormone that's the active thyroid hormone and actually does the job. So some people, the problem with the thyroxine is that they're not converting it into that T3. So you can help that conversion process by making sure that their zinc levels are good, their selenium levels are good, you're working on getting their antibody levels down, and stress hormone plays a big part of that. And if their reverse T3 levels are very high, that will stop that conversion. So sometimes you can just fix those issues and thyroxine will go back and will work well for that person. If that's too difficult or isn't happening, then you can actually do better. And then by Medicare laws, that we're able to then use T3. Now, you can either use T3 as a compound on its own that's made by a compounding pharmacy, or you can give something called natural thyroid extract, which is actually a pig's thyroid extract. So depending on whether people feel comfortable with that as a concept, but that's got all the thyroid hormones in it then. So that's got the thyroxine and it's got a bit of the T3, and it's actually got tiny bits of T1 and T2 that are other lower dose hormones, because the thyroid actually produces at least 4 hormones that we know.
Okay. So I suppose it's good to know that you've just got options, isn't it?
Yeah. Now, unfortunately, when we're only trained conventionally, doctors won't know about those options or won't feel comfortable using them. Some of the endocrinologists do use a T3, but theirs is more a synthetic form of T3, and it's not slow release, so it's given sort of 2 or 3 times through the day, whereas the one we use compounded, it's got like a 12-hour release, sort of a slow release capsule that seems to give patients a much better thyroid hormone level in the bloodstream for longer.
Yeah, I think I've tried that. I've tried a few things over the years.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's all right. I'm not asking you to comment on my health this time. But I think what I have appreciated is having tried a variety of the thyroid medications, and I've come back to the Oroxen seems to be the best for me. Yeah. So, but it's been good to have been able to explore that.
Yeah, and I think that as a person's body gets healthier, the thyroxine goes back to working. And often I'll see patients and they might already be on T3 and it might be giving them heart palpitations because it's just too strong. So, and you've got to look at just giving low doses. I think sometimes people get very excited because, of course, you've been sick for a long time, and then you want to take high doses of things, and then it has a negative effect, and then people get a bit scared off and disheartened, by that experience.
Yeah. And so what would you say to the person who doesn't want to go on thyroid medication, that's right down the natural health path?
Yes.
Is there a place for that, or is it's okay to be on medication and look at the other factors?
Yeah, well, my philosophy is that you want to take the stress off the body any way you can. And if the thyroid condition is severe, then a person's body will be really struggling to stay on top of actually trying to heal themselves. So sometimes if your thyroid's very out of whack, it's actually a good idea to go on thyroid hormone, even if it's a temporary state, and then just keep measuring the levels, because thyroid hormone's all about helping the cell produce energy. So if that cell isn't producing enough energy, it's not really going to heal itself particularly effectively either.
So you could be doing all the right kind of natural lifestyle things, but it's still not enough. Is that what you're saying? It might not be.
And it depends, because I think there's so many reasons why different people have thyroid problems. For some people it is that autoimmune condition. For other people it really is just it's an iodine deficiency, or they're eating things that are inflaming, their whole system. So for some people, when they actually cut down irritants like dairy and gluten and salicylates, for some people then the thyroid hormone level does start naturally improving. So I think it's trying to work out what each individual person's reasons for the thyroid not working well are. And for some people it's only one reason. For some people there's 10 reasons why the thyroid isn't working very well.
So it's looking at that whole person and trying to dig into the root causes and the triggers.
Absolutely. And that is where it's difficult, because we're taught conventionally that each thyroid problem is essentially the same. It's just you give the hormone and everything's fine. But if you're not fixing why the thyroid has become a problem in the first place, then you're even giving the exact right hormones and the exact right doses of everything will only get people so far.
Okay. So are there common triggers or causes for thyroid disease?
Look, the autoimmune conditions would have to be the most common, and you've got your Hashimoto's, which then makes the thyroid underactive, and you've got your Graves' antibodies, which make the thyroid overactive. So and then that's the problem where the immune system has become in an inflamed state where it goes into this hypervigilant, hyperactive state where it's looking to attack things. And unfortunately, the thyroid gland is very sensitive to that.
Okay. And are there certain things that cause that autoimmunity?
Look, I think you can start off with the state of your immune system as it was forming. What was the state of your mother's health, while you were actually forming in utero? That's a big thing. We do know that the thyroid's very sensitive to toxins. It's very sensitive to plastics and chemicals and heavy metals, and unfortunately we've got plenty of those in the atmosphere now. So if the mother's body was very toxic, then, you can start off, your body as your baby health, in an inflamed state already. And of course you don't have any control over that. Then there's a difference between whether you were breastfed as a baby. It's all about what was your gut health like right from the very beginning. Have you been eating things that you've perhaps not been digesting well for a long time, like gluten-based things or dairy-based things, or soy or salicylates. And then stress, unfortunately, makes everything worse. So then along come hormones, in teenage years, and they can exacerbate everything as well, of course. So that's where it's such a multifactorial problem.
Yeah, it is. I know I've tried to go back and think about what was how did I end up where I ended up?
Yes.
I don't know. Can you ever really answer that? I don't know. But certainly I look back and I know I had my tonsils out, my adenoids out, lots of tonsillitis, antibiotics. So I'm sure that didn't help with all the, all the gut health.
And that's why with the tonsils inflamed in the first place, so there was already an inflammatory condition going on. And we know that balance between good organisms and bad organisms, and some of us just don't control the normal bad bacteria in our gut very well, or some of us have got viral infections that are constantly, subtly active in our body that we don't realise. That's where a lot of people say, I've never felt well since I've had glandular fever. And I'm sure these viral infections in our system, they inflame the immune system and can create a lot of long-term inflammatory problems.
So are there things that we can do to actually address those I mean, if we think, well, I had glandular fever or I know I was exposed to lots of toxins, like are there things that we can actually do to try to remove, I don't know, deal with that?
Yeah, look, I mean, because so much of the immune system's in the gut, that's where if you can take the inflammatory burden off the gut, that does make a very big difference. And I know Anthony William, he's not a doctor, but he came out a couple of years ago and started talking about, getting everyone to drink celery juice. And a lot of my patients told me 2 years ago that they were going to do it. And it's going to make a difference or not, but it's probably one of the biggest things that I've ever seen for changes with people's gut health really quickly that seems to consistently work. So it's a bit of a high energy ask to, make celery juice all the time. But, there's just something about the fact that it just makes the digestive system stronger. It seems to flush out a lot of bad bacteria, and so you're improving the gut health enormously. So if you've lowered the inflammation by doing that, then that certainly takes a lot of stress off your thyroid gland.
I think I was probably one of those celery juicing patients. In fact, I had celery juice this morning, so...
So impressed.
I wouldn't say I've done it that whole time, but I go through periods. But it does make a difference. It definitely helps with, even just bowels. It helps. I feel more energy. So let's talk.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's not a cure for everything, but, it's certainly...
So let's talk about gut health, because I still hear a lot of people with thyroid issues saying, I feel all right, I can eat whatever I want, don't really see why I should give up gluten, dairy, whatever. And I know I was that. I was probably a really difficult patient early on. Well, I know you told me to do things. Yeah. Well, so I know it's difficult. That concept of giving up, well, especially gluten and dairy is a lot to get your head around. So it helped for me to understand why. So could you just explain why that's so important?
Okay. And I want to, I suppose, clarify this because it's most important if you have an autoimmune thyroid condition. So if your thyroid condition is because either, you had to have it removed, because of thyroid cancer or, so that's a slightly different scenario. But what we're looking at with cutting out gluten and dairy is saying, look, the immune system has become overly active and the immune system is now looking at attacking your own body, and we need to remove as many reasons for why it's doing that as possible. So because 3/4 of our immune system is in the gut, the immune system is constantly in a hypervigilant state and they're looking for organisms and things to protect us from, because essentially that tube of the intestine is like a tube of the outside world, that we're just swallowing, and then anything that it doesn't think is safe, you just poo it out the other end. So when the immune system's looking at that, it sees proteins that aren't digested properly as a potential organism or as a potential threat. So when we become stressed or if our digestion isn't efficient, and none of ours is 100% efficient, so when you eat protein, if it's not broken down into those smaller little amino acids, your immune system sees it as a threat. And so it starts mounting an inflammatory response the gliadin and the gluten and the casein in the dairy. And unfortunately, the thyroid gland proteins look very similar to those proteins. So your immune system's in an activated state. It's going and looking for other organisms or other bits of protein that look like that, and it will attack it. And the thyroid gets caught up in that. So, and that's why I like getting people to do their antibodies, is to say, look, this is after reason. So, and that's where I'll say to people, you may not feel any symptoms in your gut at all. But if I can show you that your antibody levels are dropping, then that's proof. Now,
so you don't have to be feeling bloated or constipated or gassy.
No.
It's not symptom-based in that sense.
No.
It's because it's the autoimmune response.
Correct. You're trying to control the inflammation. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. So I know that's been a really helpful, just basic concept for me to get is that everything just has to be about reducing inflammation.
Yeah. And I'm not saying never. I mean, I don't like I don't like making people miserable, and food's important, but there's so many easy swaps out there that I say, look, if you're at a restaurant or you're at someone's birthday or it's your birthday, look, you have what you want. Seem to make a big difference.
Okay. So you don't – I always was under the impression that if you weren't 100%, say, gluten-free, that you weren't really gluten-free at all, but is that not the case?
No, it doesn't seem to be the case. Strengthen people's digestion enough where if they're eating little bits of gluten, the body's going to cope better.
Okay. Yeah, so it's that long-term healing too. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And this is where the celery, this is what I say to people, look, it's probably an 18-month, where you've got to get your head around doing it most mornings.
Having been a long-term celery juicer, it's not that hard. The hardest part is cleaning the juicer.
Some people talk about making it fresh every day. I think, depending on how busy your life is, that's a lot to ask. I think if you make it once every 3 days, so only cleaning that juicer every third day, and so you've got enough in the fridge for 3 days, and that's much more manageable. In
terms of that gut irritants and inflammation, it's primarily gluten and dairy, or are there other things that could upset the gut?
Then you get down a bit more to individual variability. The other big, because what you're looking at is what are you eating that you're intolerant to, and the other big ones are soy products. The eggs can be an inflammatory issue for some people. Some people, of course, are intolerant to fish. They're the main ones that seem to irritate, with the thyroid. Salicylates vary occasionally, but salicylates are difficult because they're in all our healthy fruits and vegetables. But they, for some people, like especially if you get skin irritants, like I get a lot of people with eczema or itchy skin or skin rashes, where as soon as they cut salicylates down in their diet, the skin gets better and their thyroid antibodies seem to improve. So you're just looking at this individual variation as to what is it for each person.
And that's what I think is so good about that holistic approach to health and working connected with a good doctor, is that you've got to work out what works for you at this point in time.
And you've got to be patient sometimes, I mean, as you said, we've been doing this for 14 years,
yep.
And you are now perfect, of course.
Of course. Well, you have got me to a perfect point.
Yes. And I think, unfortunately, some people aren't that patient, or, I think some people think that it's going to be an easy turnaround. But I think once people understand that bigger picture, then you just realise you just keep chipping away.
Yeah, it took me a long time to get my head around that and to not expect. Yeah. I know you say now my health is perfect, but it's not. Well, it's a lot better than it was. But it has taken me a long time to get my head around that I'm not actually health perfection, that actually it's a lifestyle and a process and a constant monitoring, and depends on what else is going on in my life as to whether things are up or down. Yeah. So that actually did take me a long time to get my head around that. So I can understand that being difficult for people.
Yeah, no, and that's fair. I was being a bit silly before, but we're not machines, and so there's always going to be a state of flux. And I think a lot of us are just a bit hard on ourselves as well, and I'm sure all that stress, does take its toll.
Yeah. Do you think there's that being tough on yourself, or is there any personality traits or things that you think lead into, that are more common with people with thyroid issues? It might be anecdotal, But
No.
I'm curious.
I mean, the theory about, or let's say we get back to autoimmune conditions, is that the immune system your immune system will talk to your subconscious, and it's all about protection. So what I then look for is, what does the immune system think it's trying to protect you from? And if you're someone that is driven by stress or is driven by putting a lot of pressure on yourself, or I think then you've got to look at, okay, is that what the immune system thinks it's trying to protect you from? Is almost your own unachievable expectations or unrealistic expectations, where you're just being too hard on yourself all the time. And I think there's a real trend with that in our Western world now. You know, as women, we are just beating ourselves up all the time. And I think we've got to step back and just be a bit nicer to ourselves. And that, you know, because stress is a big element to what your immune system's
I have learned that
do.
the hard way. Yep. Yeah. So I guess, you know, when we're talking then about stress, I mean, when someone comes to you and they're in that hypervigilant state and they're stressed and they're, you know, trying to look after kids and manage a job and a household and you know, their own health and all of those things, what advice do you give someone like that to really prioritise managing the stress?
I think that when you're very time poor, and you've got to make everything very efficient, what I often start with is say, right, we'll just do 15 minutes of meditation before you go to sleep at night. Okay, so everyone else is in bed, and I said, I'd rather you miss 15 minutes of sleep at night, and you just sit in bed and put your headphones on and do these meditations, and that just at least gives you a 15-minute breather, and you lower your stress hormones, and then you go to sleep more soundly. So that's often where I first start with, because there's often no excuses for that. Exercise is amazing, but again, it's whether you've got the time for that. And I love things like yoga, where you're getting both the strength and the stretching and the headspace calming all at the same time.
Okay.
And, you know, and
so,
that's the beautiful thing with this COVID-19 has taught us, is that we can do so much stuff online.
Calming the brain, calming down, that meditation, and that gentle sort of exercise that's going to,
they're the go-tos.
again, help with the brain, but also give you the
that, you know, not well, or you
the strengths and flexibility that something like yoga,
then that's where we go to.
What if you
becomes
sorry, you go.
more important. Also much tension in our muscles, so even just stretching it out, you know, it's almost like, you know I shouldn't feel as wound up as I do, but it's like I just can't let it go. But if you stretch, then you're forcing your body to let it go, even if your mind can't quite do that yet.
Okay. And so what about things like, you know, higher impact exercise? Is that something helpful?
I think it's about energy. And if your energy is good and you can exercise for an hour and you've still got energy after that for the next, you know, 48 hours and you feel fine, then great. But if you feel wiped out by doing that, you know, and you haven't recovered 2 days later, then it's too much for you. You know, like especially if you've just had a child, you know, and you're just so burned out. But sometimes that's the only exercise that people are used to doing. And you kind of go, no, we are looking for something gentle. And that's often a bit of a head shift, you know, for people, because they're so used to, again, even exercise is a way of being hard on themselves, or, you know, so it's just finding that, you know, that slightly calmer baseline.
Yep. Yeah, I think that is a head shift from the boot camps and boxing and slugging, you know. If you're not sweating your guts up, you know, all of that. Yeah, then
and if you're a very sensitive soul, you know, I mean, you've got sort of, you know, body types that are a little bit more, you know, they just feel depleted and exhausted after doing that all the time. And this is where Ayurvedic medicine is very good. You know, they talk about kapha and vata and, you know, whatever the other one is. But then they say, right, well, if you're one of those sort of more energised people, then you can cope with, you know, the intense boot camps. Whereas if you're sort of one of the more air vata types, you're just going to get depleted. So it's not one size fits all.
You know, one of the constant frustrations for me, and I know for lots of other people with underactive thyroid, is that inability to lose weight. You're always sort of a bit heavier than you'd want to be. And so, I mean, and this other doctor that I went to see prescribed me some Durabid, which is a weight loss drug, basically speed, which fried my thyroid, and it's taken me 6 years about 5, because the last year I've been pretty good. So about 5 years to actually recover from that. So I'm very passionately against when I hear people saying, should I try Durabid? I'm like, you know. So, but we get desperate, and I see people in some forums talking about, you know, weight loss surgery, you know, like gastric sleeves and all sorts of quite more dramatic things.
Yes.
But what is there general things that are going to help with weight loss or things that we really should steer clear of? Like what are your views on that?
Yep. Okay. And again, when I've got someone in front of me, everyone is different, and what you're looking for is, when do you feel tired? When do you feel energized? And we all like eating differently as well. So again, when I create programs like this, I try to not ruin someone's life, and you're trying to work with what's going to make that person feel good and not feel deprived. And again, we get back to the inflammatory, causation of it all, because inflammation does damage our mitochondria. It damages the cells in our cells that burn the fat. So if your body's been inflamed for a long time and your cells are tired, we build up a lot of acidity, we build up a lot of inflammation in the cell, and that cell becomes quite resistant to helping you lose weight, because it can't detoxify and it can't burn fat, because the mitochondria burn fat for us. So I do like people to look at alkaline food programs. So if you want to just make changes that are gentle, it's worth then recognising that, okay, if I eat in a more alkaline way, and there's a lot of very good websites around, but the liveenergized.com website is an American website. I have no association with them, but the food is good and tasty and interesting on that. So it makes people realise that maybe they have been eating a bit acidic, maybe they, could rebalance. And it's all, lots of greens and, green smoothies, and bringing in, more fresh fruit and vegetables into their diet. So for some people, they can make little changes like that, not feel hungry at all, keep eating 3 meals a day and lose weight. If you've done that with someone, or they've already done that, then you're looking to force the body to go back to burning fat, whether it wants to or not. And this is where the awareness of fasting programs have been very powerful for a lot of people. The celery is amazing because it's very powerfully alkaline. So even when people just start doing that, their metabolism can improve. Fasting, if people have never done it before, I like people to start doing it very, very gently. And the theory behind fasting is, as soon as the body doesn't have enough calories to stay alive, like most of us need about 2,000 calories in 24 hours to keep everything going. So as soon as you start eating, less than half of that, your body has to find stores within you to turn back into food to keep your organ, to keep yourself alive. So it's forced to go back to fat burning. Now, some people can feel quite unwell, when they first make that shift. And I like people to say, all right, well, maybe just start skipping breakfast and see how you go, and then eat lunch and dinner, and just see how that kind of 16-hour not eating anything works. Now, you can have celery juice in that because there's not even enough calories for it to be food. And that alone is enough for some people. Other people have to go a bit stronger, and in 24 hours they have to eat 800 calories or less. So then they have to make that lunch and dinner a lot lighter. So, and then I say to people, all right, well, let's do 2 days in a row of that. And so 2 days in a row, they'll eat 800 calories, 2 days consecutively. The other 5 days they'll eat normally. And so that then means that people can have a life and still, go out to dinner and still have friends around, and but they've got their 2 strict days and they don't budge from that calorie, that calorie range. Now, if people have had eating disorders in the past, you've got to be careful because you don't want to flip people back into, that sort of control food issues, and they can reactivate. So, again, you've just got to take it person by person and make it all very safe. But, some fasting programs do 5 days in a row now, but I think jumping into that would be way too strong for most people.
Can it cause problems? Like, if you are in a inflamed state, or can it actually create more inflammation or not really?
Theoretically, no. When you do cut your calories down, some of that bad bacteria in your gut will die off and it will dump essentially back into your body, and that is temporarily a bit acidic and inflammatory, but your inflammation then is lower the next day. So there's the inflammatory hit is very minimal, and then the benefits of being anti-inflammatory are long-term. And there's a lot of survival mechanisms that turn on in our body genetically. It's all about survival, because back when we were cave people, we didn't eat 3 meals a day, so we had to be able to get, from one kind of, meal to the next, and it might be 3 days before we ate anything. So suddenly your cells then say, right, I need to be efficient, I need to clean out all this mess, I'm going to dump the inflammation, my inflammatory levels are going to be lower, and I'm going to be stronger and healthier. So that's the theory behind why it works.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it certainly worked for me. It's been nearly about a year, I think. But I think I've been hesitant to talk about it because I was under the impression that I think when I read that fasting mimicking diet book, it was like, you must do this under strict medical supervision. This is not something you to treat lightly. And so I think I've always been a little bit scared to even, not to say that I'm fasting, but because I don't want people to ask and then I don't want to tell people the wrong thing,
No,
So,
sure.
So, I think I've just been, are there people that shouldn't fast? Or it's more that sort of, I suppose.
Sure. Yeah, and look, that when the research came out, and that was Professor Walter Longo, and he really leads the world in fasting research now. It's a fascinating book, The Longevity Diet. But that's 5 days in a row. And that's the only program he talks about. So 5 days in a row is a lot, and especially if your body is totally out of whack and you're very acidic and your body's then going to suddenly do a big dump of all this acid bacteria and you might get shifts in electrolytes in your blood. And I wouldn't want anyone to do that unless they were talking to a practitioner that knew a lot about fasting. The original MILE program basically came out with Michael Mosley, created his 5-2 diet. And almost everyone in Australia, I think, was doing that at some point in time, and that's very gentle and everyone was fine. So if you do it gently, and that was 2 days a week, and he was only letting people have 500 calories. I think he's now made it a bit more flexible because people were finding that too hard. So he'll now let, he's gone up to 800 calories a day. And that's a nice, gentle introduction. But I've got some people that they can't even do that yet. So a lot of it is when you fast, can your body then create energy from what your stores are? And you do have some people that can't do that very well. It takes them 6 months before their body is in a healthy enough state to not drop their blood sugars too low every time they do it. And you feel horrible, if that's you. So we've got to work on fixing that issue because that's another issue, another inflammatory issue in its own right. Mm.
Yeah, I think it just reinforces how important it is to have someone that you're working with, a health professional that you're working with that understands and can help you look at and know when your body is healthy enough to give some of these things a go.
Yeah, and what to look for, and when to pull it up, and this is what I just say to people, just kind of go hour by hour. And you might only get to 3 o'clock in the afternoon and you go, right, well, that's enough, but even that, then you'll be so much stronger the next time you do it.
Yeah, and what I've worked out in having done that 2 days a week for a year is that most of the time it's fine, but like last week it was my birthday and it wasn't my birthday on a fasting day, but I think I was just in my headset that, well, it's my birthday this week. And I got my period. I'm like, after kind of a day and a morning, I'm like, I just want to eat. So
absolutely.
You know what? So I did. And I thought, well, it doesn't matter because next week I'll go back to it. And I think that was also a good head shift in terms of all those years of dieting is to go, well, it's okay. This is not about, I don't have to be perfect for 2 days a week. It's a lifestyle. So
and that's actually about learning when to be kind with yourself and when to be disciplined, you know, and there's a time for both of those.
Yeah. I know. The joys of getting older, we actually get a little bit more wise, perhaps, don't we? Perhaps. So
yeah, I think you realise it's all versions of grey, you know, nothing is actually black or white. Yes.
Yeah, I think my personality would like it if it was all black and white, but I have learnt that there's a lot of shades of grey.
That's a good thing. That's good.
So I've got a few questions that have come from my Thyroid Facebook group. So some of the things I think we have kind of covered in a general sense, but I might just ask these couple of questions if that's okay.
Yeah, sure, of course.
Do I still have Graves' disease now that my thyroid has been removed? And if so, can I still have complications and how will they present themselves?
Yeah, okay. And look, that's a really smart question. You can't have Graves anymore because, of course, there's no thyroid. So Graves only means you've got an overactive thyroid. And so you're producing huge amounts of thyroid hormone, and that's where the symptoms come. When the thyroid's removed, though, you haven't fixed the original reason why you got Graves in the first place. So what I would then go looking for as a doctor is to say, where did that original inflammation come from that triggered that autoimmune response to give you Graves? Because that won't have gone away.
So does that then mean you could end up with a different autoimmune disease?
Correct. Absolutely.
Okay.
That's exactly right. Or at least some kind of inflammatory problem. Now, that's all going to be determined on genetically what are you predisposed to. Like if you look at some people and they're inflamed, it'll come out in their skin, and they'll have really bad eczema. But it's all inflammatory driven.
Yeah. And can you actually switch from Graves to Hashimoto's?
Yeah, you can. In fact, most people have antibodies for both. So normally if someone's got Graves, they've actually got the Hashimoto's antibodies as well. It's just what's having the greatest effect on the thyroid at the time. But you often find that people that have Graves, it eventually burns out, after normally about a couple of years, and then the Hashimoto's antibodies start having more of an effect, and then they develop an underactive thyroid. That's a very common scenario.
And can you, sort of ties into one of the other questions, is once you've got one autoimmune disease, are we more likely to, collect others?
Well, yes, because it's that same immune hypervigilance overactive state. And if you look after yourself well and keep the inflammation down, then, of course, you're less likely to get any of the others. But, yeah, and you see autoimmune conditions running in families. Someone had lupus and someone else had rheumatoid and someone else had Hashimoto's. So it'll come out differently in different people. But, yeah, you can get more than one condition, unfortunately.
So are there vitamins? The next question is, what are the likely vitamins and minerals that are typically deficient in thyroid health? And should I take supplements to counterbalance that? I know we talked earlier about vitamin D is something to be tested for, but are there other things that are likely to be going on?
Look, I think if you've got an underactive thyroid, you want to know what your iodine level is, and there are urine iodine levels that doctors and health practitioners can order. But, of course, if you've got Graves, you're not going to want to put, if you've got an overactive thyroid condition, you're not going to want to put iodine in there. So I think it's with anything, you want to have these things tested and only replace them if they're low. I do find that B6 and zinc are common deficiencies for people with thyroid problems, and you can get low doses of those, over the counter, and something with a combination with both of those to do, B6, zinc, magnesium, digestive health. So B6 is part of how we produce hydrochloric acid and pancreatic enzymes and how our liver, produces bile. So if you've got that working more effectively and that counteracts a bit of the negative stress response, then that can certainly assist, and a lot of people feel better, just with their energy feels better or their bowel motility is better and their bloating's better. So that's a simple one. But again, because everyone's thyroid condition is unique, there's no, one magic vitamin that's going to work on everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there particular herbs or, say herbs that are helpful or ones that we should be avoiding if we've got thyroid problems?
Again, the bladderwrack, the one with that iodine, high levels of iodine, the kelp, again, you would want to test your iodine before you took that, because that could make Graves a lot worse, if you took that. I find things like withania very good because they calm you down and they can give you energy, and that's quite a nice, safe herb for adults. Again, I wouldn't take it if you were breastfeeding or pregnant, but, just for stress management, that's very good. They're probably just the main general ones. I don't like people taking more things than they need.
Are there any vitamins that you take that might interfere with your thyroid medication?
I think theoretically the only thing is taking calcium at the same time as taking thyroid medication can affect the absorption of it. But that seems to be the only major contraindication, taking them together. And normally you take your minerals at night anyway for most people if they're taking calcium or magnesium.
Is there something that I haven't asked you that you think is important for thyroid patients to know about or ask about or do or not do?
No, I think you've been very thorough, as always, Annabelle. So, I think we've covered most things. But I think I get a lot of people that come to see me and think that the only thing that's wrong with them is their thyroid, and that once that's fixed, everything else that's going on in their body will be, cured. So I think it's realising that the thyroid can sometimes just be another symptom of something else that's going on in your body as well. And so it's just recognising that it's just another piece of the very complex puzzle, of each person. And then it just helps you to keep your mind sort of more wide focused, rather than sort of narrow focused on your thyroid, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so really understanding that it's a complex web of and a whole body. That's the more I learn, the more I realise that it's a whole body disease. It's not really a thyroid. Well, Absolutely. It is a thyroid disease, but it's whole body and and gut and brain, and the brain stuff is so related.
Yeah.
But I think I hadn't realised. I mean, despite the fact that I've had the brain lesions, and we've done a lot of work on brain inflammation, you and I, with me. I hadn't fully digested that. I think I thought that was a separate thing, and maybe it doesn't really matter, but I think more recently I've come to understand that it's probably just part of the thyroid, complex puzzle and the impact that has on the brain. And that's helped me to really understand just everything. It feels like everything relates to the thyroid in some way.
Yes. Well, and I think because the thyroid is just so sensitive to inflammation. So it often is a common thing that gets caught up when there's something else going on anyway.
Yeah. So we've just got to stay on top of it.
Yeah.
And that's, I think that's where having regular appointments. I mean, would you say, I think you said before, blood tests every 2 or 3 months. Would that be fairly normal for?
Yeah. I mean, if you change something that you're doing, it takes 6 weeks to see a change in the thyroid hormone levels. So you would want to be testing sort of no more often than every 6 weeks. And when you start making big changes in your life, you'd want to be testing every sort of 6 to 8 weeks. But once you're stable, then sort of every 6 months, can potentially be enough. It's only if suddenly then things are changing that you want to do it more often.
Yeah, maybe it's the control part of me, but I quite like the regular. I like staying on top of it. And maybe because things have been unstable for me for a long time, it feels like part of, if something's not right, I can get onto it fairly quickly.
Yes.
And 6 months or 12 months haven't gone by where things have been out of control, because things seem to happen gradually, and then so just like this big ship that's constantly being steered and staying on course.
Yeah, well, and I think if you're making big changes to your life and putting a lot of effort in, I think it's nice to see, the effect and the outcome and, the reward for, true. Looking at the results getting better, for doing that. But you're right. I mean, if you let things get too out of control, absolutely it's going to be much harder to pull things back into line if it's gone on for 6 months without knowing about it.
Yeah, so moral of the story is stay on top of it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Ellen, for your time and your wisdom and your insight.
Well, thank you. It is. I'm very honoured to be talking. Thank you so much.
In next week's episode, we're going to talk about how to build your thyroid support team. It's really important to have both professional and non-professional people around you that support you on your thyroid journey. So we're going to talk about who you might want to have in your team, where to find them, and how to support your thyroid health with a great team of people around you. So join me then. Have a great week. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Let's Talk Thyroid. I would love it if you would subscribe to the podcast and share it with others that you know with thyroid problems. Let's get the message out there. If you'd like to connect with me further, the best place to do that is via my website, annabellebateman.com. From there, you'll be able to join my Facebook group, book a strategy session with me, download my freebie, and access any show notes for this episode. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
The information presented and discussed in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease and should not be used as a substitute for proper advice from a qualified professional.